Good morning, folks. Welcome to Coffee with Artists. My name is Rachel Wilkins. Delighted to be here this morning. Have a great guest joining me this morning. Marc, welcome to the show. Marc is a mixed media digital artist. It's good to have you here this morning, Marc. Welcome.
Thank you, Rachel.
Now, you're joining us from Greenwich, Connecticut, but you are originally... Riverside, okay.
Yeah.
But you are a New Yorker at heart, one of the few born and bred in New York City. Tell me a little bit about what it was like to grow up in NYC.
Well, I grew up in the 60s, so you can imagine Greenwich Village at that time was a fishbowl. People would come look, I remember walking down the street when I was about 13 by Washington Square Park, and a car drove by with a bunch of a family in there, and they said, "Hey, where can we find the hippies?" And I said, "You're looking at one." But it was good. Washington Square Park was a little wild, a lot of music, a lot of scenes happening. I lived with my parents down near on Houston and West Broadway, where the Picasso statue is. It's actually the housing for NYU teachers and staff. And Soho was right there. And in those days, Soho was just emerging. A couple of galleries started to come in there. And it was incredible. I mean, you'd go out on a Friday night and just do a gallery walk, and it was just amazing. The people, and you'd go to the bar, and we used to go to Finelli's. That was kind of my mother's hangout, and I started sneaking in there when I was about 17, because the drinking age was 18, and you'd see Motherwell over there, or Helen Frankenthaler, and I knew all their kids, so it was quite fun.
Oh, that sounds incredible! It sounds like a true bohemian upbringing.
It was pretty cool. Of course, my parents sent me away to school to try to get me out of there. But because there was, it was all good. It wasn't all good. There was a lot there. The influx of drugs came in, and also Soho started to become, the stores would move in. It started to get commercialized very quickly. Although that really took place in the 70s, so for the first 10 years, it was lofts and young artists and people, and nobody had any idea that it would become what it was going to become. It's like any area of New York, the artists move in first because the rents are cheap and they can get studios, they can get space. And then, of course, the rents start to go up. And the galleries follow the artists. OK. Harris was one of the first there, that Leo Castelli, a host of others, but it was all line to line galleries, and the art was just amazing. I mean, really amazing. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Please finish your thought.
I like abstract expressionism. I kind of consider myself of that school, but photorealism was coming in, and which is not my favorite part of art, but it was still just amazing to see.
I'm a huge abstract expressionist fan, especially those American artists around that time that you're talking about. Must have been just electric to be a part of that scene. What was some of your kind of best or favorite memories around that time?
Well, I used to go, my mother, who was an artist, she was actually doing plastic sculpture in the 70s, big light sculptures. And she was friends with a lot of the art, the kind of abstract expressionist group of artists that congregated in Provincetown in the summers and would be in New York in the winter, or Florida. So my best memories were actually up in Provincetown, hanging out with some of the other kids. There was a gang of us And we were all, from 13 to actually all the way to being 17. I spent every summer there,
Wow.
and that was a great memory. Yeah,
And
the
for anyone
light.
who's not familiar with Provincetown, it's a little peninsula off the coast of New England, just very fun, beautiful, beachy town.
Right. Yeah, the light is amazing. You go to these beaches that are just empty, and the tides are very strong there. So when you go out, you can actually walk for a mile at low tide. We used to go out clamming. We'd bring a spoon and a little jigger of vinegar, and go out, dig up a clam, and and eat it right there and come back.
Wow. You talked about those days being kind of wild out in, between Washington Square Park, and obviously there was this scene in Ptown. How did that feel as a young person being exposed to that so early on?
Um, I at first it was a little scary. I
Mm.
remember being, I was a latchkey kid because my mother, I was brought up for the most part by a single mom who was an actress and an artist. And she was always either doing summer stock away, and she'd leave me with, different people. So it was, but I was on my own a lot. I remember taking the train at 8 years old and 9 years old, and, or walking to school in the village, PS 41. So it was a little intimidating. I remember, especially riding the subways, people would look at me. I always thought people were looking at me. I mean, I'm not paranoid, but, here's this little kid, walking around. And, but then after that, I just loved it. I just remember going out like on a Friday night at dusk, to hit the bars. And it was like, oh, I love this. I love this moment. And it was almost like a religious moment, where you love life and you love being young. You love going out. It was great. It was really a lot of fun.
So you come from this obviously very creative, family, with your mother being an actress and an artist herself. At what point do you recall feeling that was something that you wanted to pursue? Was there an early moment in childhood where you felt like, okay, this is my calling?
You know, I didn't have a choice in it. My mom started teaching me to draw at the age of 5 with crayons. She taught me contour drawing. She later became an art teacher at Ethical Society. She was there for 15 years. But so there was never a choice. I would participate in these art festivals and I'd win an award. I never got first place or anything, but I'd always kind of come in because I always did something a little weird. I was doing abstract work, and she tried to get me to really just let my imagination go. So I started very early just doing a scribble and filling in colors. And I still have that work, and I look at it and I say, whoa, that is really good. It was just good for somebody at that age to have that freedom. The downside of that is that I never wanted to learn to draw. So my drawing skills, I'm not a good draftsman. And that frustrated me a lot because I started painting. My mom had a studio on Perry Street. It was in a little tiny basement where she did her plastic. There was a workroom in the back and then a painting area in the front. I used to go there and paint. I also used it to kind of meet, somebody at night, and but I had a really good time down there, and I'd start to paint, and I just kind of went with it. I didn't have it. When I started to paint, I didn't have something in mind. I would start with some mountains per se, because I always liked landscapes, and the painting would evolve from there. So I never consciously thought about being an artist. It was just there. I had to do it. Art was around me. All my friends were artists. My mom was an artist. Her friends were artists. It was like, okay, so when I got to college, I went in as a painter, and this is an interesting story. I went to Philadelphia College of Art. It's now called UArts. You know, they merged a bunch of different schools, and in those days, it was a much smaller school. And the summer that I got there, I came in early, and I was a heat wave going on in Philadelphia, and I was out walking around the town, and I was down by these fountains in Society Hill area, and I saw a group of guys making a film. So, you know, I was hanging out, and one of the guys called me over. He said, "Hey, can you help us out?" And it turned out these were seniors at the college. So they liked me a lot, you know, because I was this kid from New York. I was wearing high-heeled boots with velvet pants. You know, my hair was long. I had hair in those days. So they started to use me, you know, first on screen, then as a PA and stuff. And I loved it. So I ended up changing my major from painting to film. And that was a pivotal, you know, that I'd say was the biggest, you know, right turn in my life, you know, when I made that decision, because my career was built around it.
So tell us a little bit about that. Where did you head from that kind of moment where you pivoted?
Yep.
What kind of path did your career take?
Well, I didn't know anything about film prior to that. I had never worked with film. So it was a whole new learning curve for me. And in those days, Lou Jacobs, who was a you know, he had written several books, was a teacher there. And Ray Metzger was teaching photography. Now, Ray is well known, he's passed away, but he's very well known as one of the early photographers who started doing abstract photography. So you had to do a dual major. You had to study photography and film, and then when you went into your junior year, you know, just focus on film. So when I graduated from the college, I thought I was going to be a big director, a famous director, and I hit the streets, and I had made this film called Discotheque, because I used to go to the clubs and film. I would just bring a camera, and I was like fascinated by it, and that and neon lights. So I'd always bring a camera, and I cut this really fast cut film, and I called it Discotheque. It's on YouTube, and it was really fast cut. I spent almost like 3 months just cutting it, and it was a year project. It was my thesis, and my teacher hated it. He hated it because he was very old school. He came from documentary. This was fast cuts, like, you know, staccato, cut to music. It was kind of like a modern day music video. It's essentially what it was. It was 3 minutes, a little longer, 3 or 4 minutes long, and there was no linear story. It was just the night in the club, from guys setting up to the bar closing, you know, with all shots 16 millimeter. So I had that film, and I hit the streets in New York. I got a film book of the directory. It's a little yellow book, which tells you all the production companies in New York. And our commercial production, New York was the center for commercial production. So all the film production going on was either TV commercials, or it was music videos and that sort of thing. So I started going from door to door carrying my reel, and you know, people looked at my reel and they said, "Oh, we could have done that in a day." You know, it was very disheartening. But I plugged on. I met a guy named Andy Gittenfast. He was a cameraman. He had shot some really great videos for Russell Mulcahy, who was an Australian director, done feature films, and I worked as his AC. And I always hated waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning. You'd have to meet at a McDonald's or something. So one day he looks at me and he says, "You know, I don't see you as being the crew type. I see you more as the executive producer." So I said, "Well, what's that?" And he said, "Well, it's the guy who kind of organizes everything, gets the money, gets the job, sales. He's the face. You know, he presents it." So a short time after that, I was walking down Lexington Avenue, and I walked into a production company, and the guy looked at me and he said, "You want a rep? I need a rep." And I said, "Well, what's a rep?" And he said, "It's sales. You know, you carry a reel, you go just kind of what you're doing right now, but you go to agents." I was always a good salesman. That was one thing I could do. I had spent my summers working at Barney's in New York in the underground, or, you know, whatever. I was a great salesman. So I said, sure. And lo and behold, that became my career. 5 years later, I opened up my own company. I hired reps to work for me. We were actually a international and national company. I had an office in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, and we were producing and representing directors. And at one point, we had something like 25 different production companies.
Wow.
I had 4 reps working for me. So I was lucky that I had moved into the film that time. And, you know, because it's so hard as an artist to make money. I mean, you know, you look at your own struggles, you know, and I'm sure you've had a lot of people up here who are like, how can I make some money, you know, to make some art? And, but the downside of that is I was a weekend artist for about 20 years. I didn't do much art. I would paint on the weekends, mostly because the stress was starting to get to me, and I'd do watercolors or something like that. But it was until later in my life that I made the decision to just close my company and walk away from it to be an artist. And that was around 2011 is when I kind of walked out the door. You know, I tried working part-time. I brought a partner in to run it for me. I didn't want to do sales anymore. And an odd thing, Rachel, is that I can't sell my own art. I end up giving it away. I have such trouble selling it. When somebody calls me to say, hey, you know, I think I'd like that, I say, well, yeah, I'll make you a print. Just pay for the printing, or, you know.
You start talking them out of it.
Yeah, I do. And
you're not alone. It's a mindset thing, I think.
What is that about? Is it like doubt that your work isn't good, you know, good enough, or is it you're shy?
I think we just we have a hard time putting value in our own work, and I, you know, there's many schools of thought on it, but my thought is that, you know, it's such a personal thing, right? That it's hard for us to separate the emotional act of creating something and putting a price tag on it like it's a product. And I think you have to learn how to separate those two things in order to be a good art business professional. But it's not something that comes easy for most of us.
No, and you would think with my sales background representing other artists, I could do that. But I don't even know how to price my work. Well, that's why I've joined your company and have looked for your leadership, because I'm lost. I'm a sheep in the flock, you know, trying to figure this out. And I mean, selling is not my prime motivator. I'm fortunate that I made money in my previous career, but I'd like recognition. I mean, I think every artist wants that. They want validation, I think is what it is. You know, is my work, am I doing work that others can appreciate, that they can sort of share? You know, it's like a song, you know, you make a song and you want somebody else to kind of hear that and feel that feeling that went into the song.
Right.
And, you know,
we're putting out an emotional transaction, hopefully, right? We're hoping that what we create will impact somebody in some way, so that it can give us that inspiration to continue to do that.
Right. Very true.
But it is hard to switch those hats sometimes from the artist, the creator who wants to make that impact, to that business professional. And I think sometimes it's good to have two separate goals, to have financial goals over here, but to also have impact goals. so that you have something, when you talk about like recognition, for example, what is that big picture goal that you have? What would be your, your aha moment if you were to have anything happen in your art career? And aim for that. Have some tangible steps that you can take to actually get to that point. What would be your big kind of dream goal as an artist?
To have my work presented in some of the galleries that are very prestigious, to get have it in some of the Aperture or one of those Magnum, something, to have that following that. When I was a painter, I always wanted to create my own ism, like the isms of art. That there's probably close to 50 of them. So I focused, that was my moment. But now, as this sort of artist, I want people to kind of see what I'm doing and to say, whoa, that's really cool. How did you do that? Like, that's, and to be an artist, for me, there are two parallel elements to it. There's the creativity, which has to be there. And then there's the technique. You have to be very technically adept at what you do. You can look at a painting, you could see the brush strokes of it, and you could see where the artist, what they were trying to do. You may not like the painting, but you can appreciate the technique that went into it. So for me, I'm always trying to perfect my technique. I'm always, looking at new software that comes out, or new lenses, new cameras. Although the quality of the camera, I've made some art with just my cell phone. Taking a picture with an iPhone 8 and then rendering it in Photoshop, because I do a lot of work in post. Most of my work is composites, where I use, multiple photographs, and then I use airbrush. My painting skills come in with color, and I'll airbrush in Photoshop, because you have painting tools there, or Illustrator, or, there are a couple of different programs. So getting that technique to be good, I'm very hard on myself. I'm sure you're the same way as an artist. When you're making something, if it's not working, you're almost in battle with yourself, so to speak, to kind of, it's not, and when it works, there's that feeling that you get, wow, this is cool, this works. When it doesn't, it's very emotional. It's almost like dancing and you're out of step with your partner, and how do you get in sync? So
when that happens, I get a case of what I like to call the effits. I'm like,
yeah,
get me out of here. But let's talk a little bit about process. How would you say your process has evolved over time, and what does your approach to your work look like today?
Well, I carry a camera wherever I am, and if I don't, I bought a Lumix G5, which is very small. It fits in the palm of my hand. But it's a really good camera. It's 20 megapixels, and it's got a great sensor. And I just shoot. Sometimes I just, I'm just shooting. It's sort of the way I used to work as a filmmaker. I would just collect a lot of stuff, bring it back, and then wait, store it until it was ready. And very often I don't start working on the photographs right when I take them. What I tend to do is go back, to the couple of batches ago, after it's sort of sat on my computer a little bit, and I start looking at something, and I see something, and an idea comes to me, and then I take the idea and I start to develop it. And one of the things that I love about working digitally is that you can do different versions. You can, when you're painting, you might have had a great painting 2 paintings ago on the same painting, but you've covered it up. I'm sure that's happened to you. It's certainly happened to me. And My dog is here. He just had surgery, and
Oh,
he's a little sleepy guy. He's a golden retriever.
oh, the best.
Um,
Yeah, we
so
love pets on this show. There's always an appearance of some barking or someone knocking something off the table. So
so I generally, so I start with this process, and one thing which is not the best about artists usually have a certain style that they repeat over and over again. I don't. I go through phases, working in watercolors. I recently started doing metal sculpture, welding, which I love, and I've been taking some classes up at Silvermine,
wow.
which is here in Connecticut. I'm sure many of your listeners know about Silvermine, and but so I'm a generalist, and my Instagram page has. When you look at it, I've set up 3 different Instagram pages, trying to kind of narrow my art. One for black and white photography, one for collage work, and then a mishmash. So getting back to my process, I have the images that I've shot. I bring them back. I start working with Lightroom and Photoshop to edit them, and I also work with something called Nick Filters, which is a really great program that used to be free. And you can do some really abstract work with it. And it also mimics old cameras. And I'm in a phase now where I just did a series called Old Postcards. And I took actual photographs of me and the past, things that I might have shot in a camera when I was like 14 or 15. And I use them in a collage. I have a good scanner, so I scan stuff. Sometimes what I do is I do artwork, a drawing, and I scan it in, and then I manipulate it digitally. And I touched on something a moment ago about the difference between painting and working in this medium, which is that you're able to save versions. So I have, I have all these different versions of something, and then because you don't always know what works and what doesn't work, it kind of evolves, and it's a shame to lose it. So instead of going from a colorful canvas to a gray canvas, which usually happens, it turns to green or mud. I can have different versions, and I'll manipulate them, play with them, and once I hone in on something that I really like, then I start to, working on the technique. I clean it. Meaning that I'll, if it's pixelated, since I'm working in a digital format, pixelation is when digitally everything is pixels, right? When you look at a screen, basically what it is, it's hundreds and thousands and millions of tiny little pixels. And if you think of Dadaism, it's kind of like that, but we're in the millions. So those pixels, if you're shooting with not a great camera like an iPhone or something, when you blow your stuff up, and my work tends to be very big. This piece behind me is actually a small piece. I'm just gonna lift that so people can see it a little better. So some of my work is like 6 feet by 4 feet, because I'm of the school, if you're going to do something, make it big. Why not? If you have the space.
Yep.
And when you work digitally, you have infinity of space. You can do anything. So the process, continuing on that process, I start to render it, because the pixelation, when you blow something up like that, you start to see the pixels. So what do you do with that? Because you don't want to see pixels on artwork. It's like seeing scratches in a painting or something. It's distracting. So you have to go in and individually render that. And the way I render is I use a tool that's actually an old photographic tool that Ansel Adams worked with, called dodging or burning. And I go in and I, dodge or burn each thing, or I smudge them, make them little faded and stuff, so you don't see it.
Hmm.
Or what I'll do is I'll take a color and I'll start over painting it. And when you're working digitally, you can you have a control over how opaque it is, so you can actually make it look like a watercolor. It's really great. I mean, I love this technique of being able to work in this format, because I can make copies of it. I can do monoprints, and I consider all my work to be monoprints, because I have a problem. I always end up losing a file. I'm not a very good. That's my Achilles heel. I don't keep. When I finish something, it ends up getting lost because I'm already on to the next thing. So most of my work becomes, lost into the vast ether of the computer. So once it's done, the next big process is the printing. And printing is huge, and it's a whole science. I mean, there are people out there who are professional printers who are worth every penny you pay for it, because they're artists into themselves, just like there are framers who are artists. So I work with a guy who works out of his home in White Plains, and he has all the equipment. And he probably could have been an artist, but he got into this business, and he does my work for me. I hand him a file, and he will use very often what's in style right now is printing right onto aluminum or different surfaces. I think the word for it is subjectation or something like that. So the printing process, if I'm working small, I do my own printing. I've got a good Epson printer in my home. I have a studio in my basement and another studio upstairs where I do, I have a wet studio downstairs where paint and anything I want to do, and then a very clean area where I do my computer work, and the printer sits there, and it's a big printer, but I can only print up to 19 by 22. So I can at least do all my tests. And if it's small enough, I have control over it. Otherwise, I send it off to a printer. And that's costly. To print work, it can cost up to, $300, depending on the size. The piece,
the difference between the quality, investing in that quality print versus, going the cheap way can be so significant in what you can price the work at. Makes
like framing your artwork, taking it to a good framer is worth always, because I hate these, aluminum black frames that people, and you see them in art shows and you say, that's a lovely painting or a lovely drawing, a lovely piece of art, but why did you put it in that black, frame, and it's so, how do you do your work when you're painting? Do you send it to a professional framer, or?
I actually, for a long time, I was going into the city and using Tribeca Print, who are wonderful, wonderful. It just wasn't very convenient for me to kind of take it in, and then, especially with the large works, because I couldn't, really kind of trudge them around New York City. But I now have been using Michael's, and surprisingly, very inexpensive. And for the most part, although I did just have a little bit of an issue with them recently, but that's a whole other story. But for the most part, they've been really, really great. And they have an in-house framing company that they work with. So it's all done in-house. It takes about 2 weeks, but really good.
Right.
And I like that I can go in and actually physically pick out the frame and hold it in my hand and look at the mat and really see the light to make sure that it's a good fit.
What kind of frames are you working with? Lighter shades? White seems to be in style right now.
Always white. Yeah, always. Yeah. What I've been doing is instead of matting, so like putting the work in and then having the mat around the outside, doing 2 mats underneath the piece so that it gives the illusion that the work is floating.
Right.
and then having a really deep edge around that, the work, with a very thick white frame, and it just looks like museum quality framing.
Right. Yeah, I like that. I like the way to do stuff that's afloat. I tend to do stuff that's has no, frame at all. It's
Mm,
just mounted and it
right.
looks like it's off the wall. I always wanted to ask you, your company is such a great company. It's really helpful. How did you get into that as an artist? Like, what was that moment where you had that idea, as an entrepreneur to create this company? Did it evolve, or was it an idea?
It was a frustration, to be honest. That was really what happened. It was, I was like you. I was running around the city trying to get my work seen, right? Like you were doing with your directing, and just coming up against rejection after rejection after rejection, and thinking there has to be another way to do this. Like, and at the time I was bartending. I was in New York City. I was, working with a bunch of fellow creatives, as you know, in the service industry in New York. It's actors, musicians, artists, and we just, a few of us started to talk, and I said, well, why can't we kind of throw our own shows? And then we found this venue downtown. It was on Warren Street. It was actually a Italian restaurant, but downstairs they had an event space. And we said, what the hell? We'll throw an art show, and it was no money made for us at all. It was, just purely a kind of passion project. And it just started to get a lot of people coming through. We had like 20 artists, and we had a band, and we had entertainment. And then, we started to do them kind of more frequently. And then about 2 years in, it was like, okay, we need to find a way that we can actually make some money if we want to keep this going. And that's really where it all started. And then, before the pandemic hit, we were in 14 cities around the US doing this. So it's, I think there was just that need. Like, people were like sick of the establishment and, the hierarchy of, you have to know a certain person, you have to have a certain degree, you have to, be in this very elite circle to be even considered a part of the art world. And I wanted to just shift that narrative. Like, I wanted us to take back the control a little bit and remember what art is about.
Right. Yeah, most great companies come out of need. There's a void and somebody fills it, and that's where it evolves. How did you get into art to begin with? You grew up in Australia, right? Am I right? No.
Other side of the planet, but you're not.
Oh.
A lot of people think that. I grew up in Liverpool in the UK.
Oh, really? Okay. You don't have that sort of accent that I would associate with Liverpool, but that might be.
I don't even know what happened to my accent, to be honest, because I've been here 12 years now in the States, and yeah, I don't know. Something happened about year 6, and I don't even know what it is now, whether it's American, English, Scouse. It's a mix of everything. When I go home, though, when I go to visit home and come back, it's right back.
Right, right, yeah.
But yeah, no, I was somebody who just always loved to draw and paint, and from an early age, and never really thought that that was something that could be a career. And then when I came here, and how just inspiring New York City is. You grew up here. Like, there's magic in those streets, right? There's something that tells you anything is possible. You can do whatever your heart desires. And if you try it and it doesn't work, that's okay. And that just lit a fire in me. And I started to just paint without thinking about why I was painting. And it just blossomed from there.
Do you have a studio, separate studio from your home, or do you work at home now? Or
I work at home.
Yeah.
I mean, the added expense of it, moving out of New York City was certainly helpful to enable me to be able to work at home.
Right.
But yeah, I'm somebody that I don't think having a separate studio would be the right thing for me. I like my home comforts around me.
Right. Yeah. It's
like
nice.
Like you do too.
Yeah, it's convenient to work out of your home. As I mentioned, I've started doing some steel welding, and that's a whole other, skill set that requires an investment, a financial investment, if you're really going to be serious. So I go up to Silvermine, and there's I sign up for one of their courses, and really it's not, he doesn't teach. He just kind of says, here's the equipment. What do you want to do?
Mm.
You know, shows you how to use it, and you're on your own.
Yeah.
But you have this incredible space, you have, and you're working with other artists, who are welding, and you kind of, well, how do you do this, and how do you do that? And you just get ideas. And so for that, you do need,
Yeah.
an external thing. But what about like motivation? I always have trouble, I go through a period where I'm just not motivated to go down and do the work. How do you deal with that? I'm
You
always curious.
I actually hit a little bit of that recently. I took on, and there's, I'm sure a psychotherapist will have a lot of fun with this, but I took on a big project right, like I guess middle of May. So in the middle of kind of the pandemic, and I said, I'm going to do 30 paintings, a painting a day every day for Pride Month. Each one is going to be of an icon, a pioneer from the LGBTQ community, and was just full of motivation, momentum, energy. I was excited every day to get up and finish the piece and share it and do this whole thing. And then day 28, I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like 2 days away from finishing it, right? 2 days. Something just went, nope. And it was
But
like a flick to switch.
yeah.
And it's unbelievable sometimes that and I know I have to work through that when it happens, but it's like, it's almost debilitating when that happens. It's like somebody said, all right, no, you've used all your creativity now. That's it. Sorry. You only
Right.
made it. But, I think a lot of what I was trying to do was have something I could control. Because
Hmm.
so we're so out of control with this current happening, right? With what's occurring in the world and the unrest and the pandemic and everything that's going on in the US right now. To have something that I could say, okay, this is my little corner of the world and I'm going to control this. And, when it got towards the end, it was like, okay, well, I don't really have any control over this either.
Right.
But
It's like you just have to kind of go with that,
yeah,
listen to yourself.
I think
Yeah, we all feel like we're held hostage, I think.
yeah. Have you found that you've been more or less creative in this moment?
I was initially I was more creative because what else are you going to do? Art is a cathartic. At least it is to me. I kind of lose myself in my art when I'm doing it. My mind goes completely off of everything else, and it's sort of in that resting mode because I'm focused on a thought or an idea or something, and I have a purpose. I know what I need to. I mean, as you touched on something that's actually genius about, we don't have control over this thing. I feel like we're in an alt dimension. I really do. It's like, how did things get so, effed up? I mean, what's going on? Like, we're better than this, and it's like, when you look at what's happened in 2020, it's just like, it's like, ooh, you feel like you're in some alt movie or something like that. So initially, I was very creative.
Mm.
I just went down to my studio and I started, doing some work. And then, I became news obsessed. I started like, listening to the news and, like this and that. Dr. Fauci would be on. I got to get upstairs, and see the, And then I noticed that I was becoming very unhappy. I wasn't sleeping well. Had anger. I had certain emotions, and I live with my wife, and she's a nurse who works at a public school, and so she's been home through this whole period. And my son, who is 21, he goes to Berkeley in Boston, and he's been home. So we're all kind of like caged, you know, we're held hostage. My daughter, who's an artist who lives in New Orleans, used that frame. She said, I feel like I'm hostage, you know, I can't go out. I can't, you know, so that started to really frustrate me, and I didn't want to do anything. You know, everything evolves. You kind of go through a period where you're in a rut, and then all of a sudden you kind of dig yourself out. There's always, you know, somebody once told me life is like up, down, up and down, and you know, just you got to go with it. You know, when you're there, just kind of like laugh at yourself, have a sense of humor, and say, okay, I guess I'm a dilettante. I can't do anything. And
I think we have a hard time with pause, right? Like we're so accustomed to just instant gratification and go, and everything is, you know, 100 mile an hour. That when we were told, okay, and they literally used, I think Governor Cuomo said, you know, we're in pause, and that word just kept coming back to me again and again. I'm like, okay, but when can we press play again? Like, do we have a date? Like, the idea that we're just in this holding pattern without any kind of plan is a hard place to just be. And I think there's so many lessons that, I mean, I've certainly learning about myself, about how much more work I need to do on myself to be okay just with life on life's terms.
Right. That you hit it. Life, accepting life on life's terms. And somebody said to me, you know, this is also a good period for reflection, you know, kind of going over your life a little bit, and saying, you know, I'm sure you went through the period when the pandemic hit where you're like, well, I think I'll clean up that closet, you know, organize that room or something. We did. So you go through it and you kind of think, and, you know, but that gets old too. I mean, I'm just over this whole pandemic. I'm thinking, like, come on, like, please, you know.
And I think it didn't help that, like, right when this happened, like, all this messaging that you would see on social media was like, well, you know, Einstein created this during the plague, and, you know, this great book was wrote, and this and all these like amazing things that people did when they were in times of you know, crisis. It's like that pressure, right? Like, you need to be doing whatever it was you thought you'd do when you have time. You should be doing it right now, but neglecting the fact that we're all under like a period of extreme stress. Like, this has not happened in most of our lifetimes.
No,
we're dealing,
you know,
something
I feel
catastrophic.
Right. Were you here when 9/11 happened?
I was not. No, I was in the UK.
My daughter, who's 30, she was, I guess, 12 when 9/11 happened. And so, you know, a lot in this community, tends to be a wealthier community that I live in. And the train went in that morning, and when it came back, there were a lot of people from the community who weren't on the train. So you know, we had that collective pause of sadness that was so prevalent, and now this has happened, and I just wonder about those millennials or post millennials, you know, people that were born 89, you know, 90, 91, like what it's like for them, because it's got to be really growing up, you know, with terrorism, 9/11, terrorism, you know, and then now this, it's like alt shock. What was that famous book written? But who was it? Toffler wrote Future Shock or something. I forgot his name, but it's like we're in alt shock right now. It's like, okay, what's going to be next? It's almost like, Hollywood's next big movie, is this a movie?
Right. Well, how was it as a father raising children in that environment?
Um, I'm of the philosophy that you, you can show the path to your child, but you have to let them walk it. I'm very big on less control. My mother tried to be very controlling when I was growing up, but she failed at that, and I ended up doing whatever I wanted because I was on my own. So as a father, I try to get my kids to talk about it and to if you can articulate something in conversation, you've gotten it out. You've shared it. It's a thought. When you hold things in and you don't articulate them and you manifest on them and just keep going and obsessing, that's when things start to get really bad. And my daughter is having a really tough time right now. I spoke to her last night. She said, Dad, I'm depressed. I can't, she's really gotten very emotional and a part of the Black Lives Matter because she lives in New Orleans, and New Orleans is a very liberal city, but it's at the same time, the disparity between the wealth is very strong down there. There are poor people that live there, and they often, are, and the police down there can be. So she's really gone through that phase where she's very, a little over obsessed with the news and what's happening in Portland, and she gets angry about it. So as a father, what can you do? You can give them. You kind of almost have to be a little manipulative in the sense that you want to kind of put the wisdom in front of them so that it's their discovery, but not push it, because if you push it, it doesn't get there. People have to kind of discover things on their own. They have to evolve. So as a father, all I can say is, maybe turn off the news. No, I want to watch the news. I want to be informed. But it's not good. It's it's very negative. I mean, think about the news right now. That's a business. People, they want to make money just like you and I. They want to have good ratings. So when they have a great story, and what sells the best, negativity is like very powerful.
It's actually quite disturbing when you really discover that it is all about the ad buying. And I think I have a friend on right now who works in that industry who's listening, but everything comes down to the dollar that they can make on the advertisements that fill between these programs, right? And to look at something, and I've started to do this myself now because I see the big picture, but I'll flip between the two most polarizing networks, which I would say will be MSNBC and Fox News. When there's the same story, a particular story happening, like Portland is a good example, and to flip between the two channels, and you would think that there was two totally different things happening. What is real at that point?
Right. And somebody recently said that there was an article in the Times, an editorial, that said that both of those stations, it's like, okay, it's like professional wrestling. Okay, today I'm going to be this, and you'll be that, and that it's very true. I tend to try to watch the BBC or public news because everything else gets so politicized. It's there's such a polarity going on, and I wish we could all take a collective pause moment and say, what are we doing? Like, let's start to do stuff that's good for our society, and not be like, well, so aware of are the ratings and doing this. Like, what are we really doing? Okay. But that's not going to happen.
There's dollars to be made in ad spend, right?
Yeah, it's all about the ratings.
Mm-hmm. Well, on a lighter note, because we could talk about this all day, we are going to take some questions for Marc. This has been a wonderful session, Marc. I could talk to you for another 2 hours. So if anybody does have any questions, do jump into the comments. I see a couple already. What are your aspirations? What do you hope for in the next couple of years?
Um, Honestly, I'd like some recognition. I'd like my peers, people that respect my work, to respect my work, to have acknowledgement. I also think that art is one of the things about art is you create a legacy with art, long after you're past, your art lives on. And that's very powerful for me. So making that legacy, I suppose, and recognition are the two most important things to me.
Wonderful. All right. So first of all, where can people see your work? What is your website address?
Okay, so my name is spelled Marc, M-A-R-C. Then my last name is VanDermeer, VanDermeer.com. Marc VanDermeer.
So I've added that to the comments, folks. So do go check out Marc's website. You can see it right underneath the screen right now as well, or right on the screen even. All right, so let me see what questions we have here. Okay. Emma Worth. Good morning, Em. Emma is joining us from Liverpool as well, my hometown. All right, so Emma said, does film influence your work? If so, do you have a particular director or go-to film for inspiration?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love film. Film is an art. I still, make little short films, but they're, they haven't evolved. Yeah, I love Stanley. There's there's so many directors that I love, because one of the things when you take film, you study the history of it. And there's probably no one film director that I love. Stanley Kubrick is somebody that I think is a genius, because his films have always been technically and just, right on. I also like a lot of the Italian directors, the old Italian directors from the 50s, De Sica, Bertolucci, who made these black and white films. And those are, I get ideas from watching these black and white films, some of the older films from Truffaut, Claude Lelouch, because when you're working with black and white, which I do like to do, a lot of my photography is mostly black and white. It's very, it is, it's either positive or negative in terms of its spatial concepts. So I like some of those early directors who just worked in black and white. Yeah.
Wonderful. All right, let me see if there's any questions over on the other app. All right, folks. Well, do go check out Marc's amazing work. Reach out if you're interested in purchasing a piece. Marc, thank you so much for joining us. Any final thoughts to share with our viewers?
No, just be creative. Go out and make something today, Seize the day.
Carpe diem. All right. Well, thank you, folks. That is our show for today. We will be back again next week. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Marc.